To unpack this further for us, we're now joined by Head of Wits Business School, Professor Jannie Rossouw, and he joins us via our video link. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition. Of course, we have seen the final day of the BRICS Summit. Many have said it is a success. We've seen 6 new countries joining the BRICS blocs. What is your takeaway from the BRICS Summit?
Good evening, Bali, and good evening to the viewers. Yeah, I now think of the 5 call it current members as BRICS, and then with the 6 members added, I want to call it BRICS Plus. So, of course, the 5 members agreed on the expansion of BRICS to BRICS Plus, and we will now have 11 members in the future. There are also other countries that want to join BRICS Plus, as it will now be from the 1st of January next year, and it means that these 11 countries will have to agree on the further expansion of the BRICS grouping. However, this expansion of BRICS into BRICS Plus means it will play a larger and more important role in world geopolitical developments going forward, and it is exciting that South Africa forms part of that.
And many are lauding, the signing of these new nations to the BRICS bloc, and you are saying BRICS Plus. At the same time, I want to zoom into the oil-rich based countries. What does this mean for the BRICS bloc, and particularly what does this mean for South Africa and its economy?
Yeah, it's interesting that the oil-rich countries were brought into BRICS. It gives me the impression that this new BRICS Plus will try and get better control of oil production and oil trade in in the world. South Africa will benefit from that, of course, but if they can get that, it might give them leverage to move oil trade away from the US dollar, and that will be a big change in international trade as we know it currently.
And many would say that when we zoom into South Africa and, the oil-rich based countries in this BRICS bloc, what does it say about, the state of South Africa's economy in particular? Because yesterday we saw, the inflation rate dropping. And, one thing that was said to be a major advantage to that was because of the oil price and particularly the transport sector and the petrol price. What does it say about South Africa's economy?
We have to remember that in BRICS, as we've had it up to now, South Africa is by far the smallest economy, and in the new BRICS Plus structure, South Africa will be the 2nd smallest economy. The Ethiopian economy is smaller than South Africa's. We must also understand that South Africa's voice in BRICS will now be, in a sense, diluted because we are not the only country in BRICS speaking for Africa. Egypt and Ethiopia will also speak for Africa within BRICS Plus in the future. I also want to make a few remarks about the discussion of BRICS currency that we heard a lot about in the past 3 days. I must just make the point that launching a new currency is not a simple matter. It's easy to talk about it, but before you can launch a currency, for instance, for a grouping like BRICS, you will have to have fiscal policy convergence and monetary policy convergence, and you will now need this for all 11 countries in BRICS Plus. At the same time, whilst South Africa is now talking BRICS currency this week, we must remember that as late as July 2022, Dr. Naledi Pandor, the Minister of International Relations, expressed her support for an African continental currency. And you can't have an African continental currency, South Africa supporting that, and the BRICS currency. These are 2 different currencies. And the one aspect that's not been put in the debate as yet is South Africa's relationship within the common monetary area with Eswatini, Lesotho and Namibia. If South Africa supports a BRICS currency, where will that leave our common monetary area partners, Eswatini, Lesotho and Namibia, those countries are clearly outside BRICS Plus at the moment. So there's still a lot of work to be done before we can really start talking a regional currency. And there are many things in my mind that are still not clear.
And while we talk about this BRICS currency, Professor, at the same time, we know that, the BRICS nations have concluded to say that, they will begin trading between each other in their own local currencies. How long will it take for these countries to actually reach that point where they are able to trade amongst each other first in their own currencies before they get to the BRICS currency?
Well, countries can trade in their own currencies with one another if they have a settlement system supporting such trade. So trading in this way as envisaged will imply that a settlement system must either exist or must be developed. And I've not looked into the question whether such a settlement system exists or whether we are close to developing it. But without a settlement system to facilitate trade in these currencies, it will not be possible to do it. Most international trades, the settlement, of course, nowadays done through the continuous linked settlement systems, and we will have to look how the existing settlement architecture can make provision for trading in domestic currencies as envisaged.
And what does it say about the dollar as these countries begin to move away and de-dollarize and start to trade in their own currencies? What does it say about the dollar itself?
Well, if these countries are successful with this initiative, it will of course reduce the importance of the US dollar, both as an international trading currency and as an international reserve currency. And that's nothing new in the history of the world. We must remember that before the dollar was the reserve and trading currency of the world, the British pound had that role. And before the British pound had that role, hundreds of years ago, the Dutch Rijksdollar played that role. So these reserve currencies come and go over time, and it's normally linked to the economic power and stability of the country issuing these currencies. So if you want to develop a currency or even a currency of one of these countries to play this role, you have to have a stable economy or economy supporting it. And then secondly, I should add that to be a reserve currency, you cannot have a system of exchange control. We still have exchange control in South Africa, and some of these other countries also still have exchange control. So we will also have to look at the exchange control environment before we can move into something that we want to call a reserve currency. A reserve currency cannot be subject to exchange control regulations.
And Professor, my last question to you, I'm going to really try and squeeze this in. I mean, the talk has been throughout these 3 days that there seems to be a move or a shift in the geopolitics, and, when you look at, the move, would you say that this is a move away from the West, especially economically?
Yes, it does seem like that, a trend away from the West. And then, as this is the last question, I really also need to add that all of us, all South Africans, can feel very, very proud that we, South Africa, can still organize a conference of this magnitude, host it successfully, and host all these countries with their leaders in South Africa and make a big success of it. All South Africans can feel very proud of this achievement.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for your time. That is Professor Jannie Rossouw, the head of Wits Business School, just giving us a bit of insight there on that 3-day summit that indeed concluded today with at least 6 more countries now joining the BRICS bloc, and they will be joining the BRICS bloc from the 1st of January in 2024.